All right, so hi, welcome back to the archives. So we're talking about why does he do that? Um, Inside the Minds and of Controlling and Angry Men by Lundy Bancroft. So I just moving into chapter 8, which is on abusive men and addictions. Again, I've gotten to this before, but it just basically talks about how not all substance abusers are abusive, right? Some men get drunk, addicted to alcohol and beer, and they don't beat on people. They don't call them names. Some men will actually drink outside the house, stay away, and come back and pass out. Right. So just because he's an alcoholic is not the reason why he's abusive. While substance abusers can be male or female, abuse partners are overwhelmingly male. That's another thing. How come women could be addicted and aren't necessarily abusive? And so the partner abuse and substance abuse are two separate problems. Both are rampant in the world today, so it is no surprise that they turn up in the same person, but they're two separate things, is what the author says, right? Is an abuse itself a type of addiction? He says no. He says no. Partner abuse has its own causes and dynamics that are unrelated to addiction, although it also shares some features. And so some of the features that are similar is like both will escalate. An addict will escalate, right, where you need to drink more and more and more. You need to smoke more and more and more because your tolerance level becomes different, right? Same thing with abuse. It may escalate, but at the same time, he's also says note, however, that um, a woman that is abused physically, they actually, it's not more and more and more. It actually becomes less because you learn to be frightened right away, right? So it's not that you need to be beat more and more. Um, they become easier to frighten rather than harder, right? So one third of the men decreased their violence over time because the women had become so frightened that the men would control them with scary words and glances, right? I don't need to punch you no more. Just the way I look at you, now I'm letting you know what time it is. So that's some of the difference. Another similarity is they're both denial, there's both minimization, and they blame someone else. I'm not an addict, right? To deny I'm not an addict. I'm not addicted. You're just being dramatic. You're being so dramatic. I'm so sorry I have a drink every day. The doctor says 3 glasses of wine is good for your health anyways, right? They blame somebody else. They choose people that approve their lifestyle. So an abuser is usually going to be around other abusers, right? An addict is usually going to be around other addicts. So those are some of the similarities. Partner abusers make similar choices regarding their social circles, right? So their homies are also abusing people. That's why they don't say shit. That's why they don't get called out because they're doing the same thing at home. So usually they have the same social circles, right? You're with the other people who do coke. You're with other people who do heroin. You're with other people who drink alcohol. You're with other people who verbally name call. Lying and manipulation, right? Both of them are huge liars. There's dishonesty, there's manipulation, there's deception. They both have chronic problems with lying to cover up their problem and to escape accountability and to get other people to clean up their messes for them. They lack predictability. Both partner abusers and substance abusers tend to keep their partners and children walking on eggshells. Um, what else? There's high rates of returning to abuse after periods of apparent change. So it can be easy to like fall off, right? And start using again. Similarly, they don't but the difference is partner abusers don't usually hit rock bottom. With addicts, folks who are addicted to substances, sometimes they'll know that like, oh my god, I finally went into treatment when I realized that like I was gonna die, or this habit was costing me my lifestyle, right? I can't afford rent no more. Um, they hit rock bottom. Abusers don't ever hit rock bottom. They can abuse for 20, 30, 40 years. They'll go to work. No one knows they're abusive. They go to school. Like, you don't, it's not self-destructive. Addiction is self-destructive. Being abusive is not actually self-destructive. If anything, they abuse because it builds them up, right? So that's another difference. They talked about her life and her freedom may slide down the tube, but his mind, he does even better. Abusers usually even do better, right? You see that again in the Diddy documentary, for instance. He just has a wake of all of these victims, but like he just keeps ascending. He keeps doing better and better and better. And so they are occasionally experiencing unpleasant legal consequences. Again, unless there's legal consequences, they don't usually change, right? So again, they can abuse for years and decades even. The alcoholic tends to drink more and more, not because of how well it is working, but because of how poorly it is, right? Partner abuse, on the other hand, can be rewarding to the abuser for years, right? Potentially for a lifetime. They get a lot of benefits, right? Um, it's impossible to get them to change because it's not self-destructive. All they do is gain. They have gained control over you. They gain control over your life. It's just a lot of rewards. Plus, there's more societal approval for abuse and addiction, right? There's way more support systems for substances. I mean, now you see more, but you even see, like, remember when Mark Carney first came in? He cut the gender and women's studies. It's just like when we don't, domestic violence, don't know her. Addiction, oh, we're so sorry. Let's give you all of these supports, right? And so one is more socially accepting. Being a batterer is like no one wants to talk about it, right? Um, if he stops drinking, will he stop abusing me? This is maybe for short term, but it's usually not how it works, right? We talked about this already. Getting clean is not going to change their abuse. The abuse is a completely separate situation. Sometimes what will happen is even when they start going to AA and they do get clean, if you decide to keep drinking, then they make you out to be the alcoholic, even if you're not abusing alcohol, right? Sometimes if the woman is the one that is an addict, then he might sabotage her. So they share a story here where a man was with his wife. She was the one who was going through AA, but he would always make sure there was a case of beer in the fridge, right? And then when she would just like, um, what is that word called? When she would, I can't think of the word right now, relapse, right? When she would relapse and drink the beer in the fridge, he'd be like, "Oh, you're so weak, and why wouldn't you?" But like, why would you keep a case of beer in the fridge that you're not drinking, that you're waiting to tempt her, right? So sometimes they will sabotage. I'm sure some women will do that as well too, right? So that's something that's definitely there. Um, or they start every disappointment, every argument turns into like, you're threatening my sobriety. Now you can't ever speak up because as soon as you speak up, you're stressing him out, and that stress might lead him to go back and relapse, right? So they hold that against you once they do become clean. Is now they weaponize the addiction, the sobriety, and use that to abuse you. Now you can't ever make a complaint if he does something wrong because now you're threatening his sobriety, right? You're if you don't stop nagging him, he might relapse again, or he might use it against you. Oh, if you leave, I'm gonna go do cocaine again. I'm gonna do a line of coke again, and you're just like, so I can't ever leave. So they'll weaponize it against you in that way as well too, right? Um, you can't ever leave me because now I'm gonna start drinking again. Same with like suicide, right? I'm gonna die. I'm gonna kill myself if you leave me. They weaponize those kind of stuff, and so um, again, alcohol doesn't make people directly belligerent. Um, if anything, it says that alcohol is a depressant, right? A substance that rarely causes aggression. You were aggressive from before, not the alcohol. Saying marijuana has no biological actions connected to abusiveness, right? If he believes that alcohol can make him aggressive, it will. But again, it's a perception, it's that mindset. He already was aggressive from before, right? If he doesn't attribute violence causing powers to substances, he is unlikely to become aggressive. So again, it's kind of like mind over matter. Um, all right, my battery. The alcohol arms the abuser with an excuse and helps him to overcome any shame and embarrassment that might hold him back, right? You can be like, oh, I just blacked out. That's another thing. Talk about blackout drunk. Like, when you black out, you blacked out. But most people be like, oh, I just blacked out and did all these things. Like, that's not how it works. When you black out, it's when you pass out. So like when you black out, you're not moving, right? But people will be like, oh, I was blackout drunk and I don't remember anything. So suddenly they don't remember what they were doing the night before. You can't really hold them accountable now because they didn't even know what they were doing, right? Um, the alcohol is an excuse to kind of help them mitigate some of that embarrassment, some of that shame of their actions. What else? A verbally abusive man who escalates to physical violence or threatens only when he's intoxicated. Again, that's usually sometimes it's premeditated, right? There's a man who said like he knew that he wanted to start shit and that's when he wanted to go drink. So it's not that he became the alcohol made him abusive. He already was looking for a fight and when he drank he knew he was gonna go get one, right? If your partner's behavior becomes much worse when he's intoxicated, you may tend to focus your attention on trying to manage his drinking so that you never fully realize how abusive he is when he's sober, right? The problem can thereby create a huge diversion from critical issues. Alcohol does not change a person's fundamental value system. People's personalities, when intoxicated, even though somewhat altered, still bear some relationship to who they are when they're sober. When you are drunk, you may behave in ways that are silly or embarrassing. You might be overly familiar or tactically honest. But do you knock over little old ladies for a laugh? Probably not. Do you sexually assault the clerk at the convenience store? Unlikely. People's conduct while intoxicated continues to be governed by their core foundations or beliefs and attitudes. Alcohol encourages people to let loose what they have simmered below the surface. And so another thing is, even when people are drunk, they still know what they're doing. This one man got drunk, came home, beat his wife, and when he was describing it, the guy's like, "How come all of her scars and everything is on her lower body? How come you didn't bruise her face?" And he was like, "Oh, well, I knew not to do that, right? I knew I was gonna do anything that would show." So even in his drunken stupor, where he couldn't control himself, he was smart enough to know that he had to think for his reputation. He was smart enough to know that he couldn't do anything that can get him arrested. He knew not to give her a black eye. But the bruises on her legs and her belly, that he didn't know because he didn't care because she could wear pants and wear a shirt and all of that was covered. So even when they lose control, they still know that it's all about them, right? He had remained focused on his desire to protect his own reputation and to avoid putting himself at risk of arrest. So he had restricted Lynn's injuries to places where they could be covered by clothing the next day. He could scarcely be termed out of control, right? He knew. So a lot of it is like to protect their own self-interest, to avoid damaging their own prized belongings, and that is another thing, right? When something happens and they start freaking out and they start destroying stuff, pay attention. It's usually your stuff they destroy, not their stuff. Yeah, so we already talked about the blackout. There's no such thing as blackout. The loss of memory happens later. Finally, even if substance could cause people to lose control, the abusive man would still be responsible for his actions while intoxicated because he made the choice to impair himself with alcohol or drugs, right? So it's always their responsibility. You can't take responsibility for that. The addiction fortifies his denial of his abusiveness. An abusive man typically believes that his use of abusive substances is none of his partner's behavior. So yeah, basically that is Abusive Men and Addictions. That was chapter 8, okay? So I'm going to end this there. Until next time, in solidarity.